how do you do it? How do you bring the frustrated together? There are a number of unifying techniques, and by unifying, I don't mean anything lovely or wonderful, but in Hoffer's explanation, how is it that you bring the frustrated together? What can unify them? Well, hatred, obviously, right? So, for instance, here from Hoffer again, hatred is the most accessible and comprehensive of all unifying agents. It pulls and whirls the individual away from his own self, makes him oblivious of his wheel and future, frees him of jealousies and self-seeking. He becomes an anonymous particle quivering with a craving to fuse and coalesce with his like into one flaming mass. Mass movements can rise and spread without belief in a god, but never without belief in a devil. Usually the strength of a mass movement is proportionate to the vividness and tangibility of its devil. When Hitler was asked whether he thought the Jew must be destroyed, he answered, no, we should have then to invent him. It is essential to have a tangible enemy, not merely an abstract one. F.A. Voigt tells of a Japanese mission that arrived in Berlin in 1932 to study the National Socialist movement. Voigt asked a member of the mission what he thought of the movement. He replied, it is magnificent. I wish we could have something like it in Japan, only we can't because we haven't got any Jews. It is perhaps true that the insight and shrewdness of the men who know how to set a mass movement in motion, or how to keep one going, manifest themselves as much in knowing how to pick a worthy enemy as in knowing what doctrine to embrace and what program to adopt. The theoreticians of the Kremlin hardly waited for the guns of the Second World War to cool before they picked the democratic West, and particularly America, as the chosen enemy. It is doubtful whether any gesture of goodwill or any concession from our side will reduce the volume and venom of vilification against us emanating from the Kremlin. Remember, this is 1951. One of Chiang Kai-shek's most serious shortcomings was his failure to find an appropriate new devil once the Japanese enemy vanished from the scene at the end of the war. The ambitious but simple-minded general was perhaps too conceited to realize that it was not he, but the Japanese devil who generated the enthusiasm, the unity, and the readiness for self-sacrifice of the Chinese masses. So this line, mass movements can rise and spread without belief in a god, but never without belief in a devil, is critical, I think.
Absolutely.
And how many devils does the new authoritarian left have? Anything that they will append phobe to or ist to, you can find the devil there. So if you're being accused of being racist, you can find that white people are the devil. If you are being accused of being sexist, you can find that men are the devil. That cis people are the devil, that all, that able-bodied people are the devil, all of these particular ways, immutable demographics, immutable characteristics, become the devil in this new world order. And it's quite effective because, man, rage feels good. It brings people together, even if they're not actually fighting for anything.
All right. This leads to multiple things, but I think the behavior of hymenopterans,
ants, bees, and wasps.
Yeah, bees and wasps are the
Ants,
ones
bees, and wasps,
in mind in this
Okay.
case, have a behavior, and actually, but they don't.
Yeah.
My graduate work in Panama involved dealing with the hazard of Africanized bees, that there were bees that had been hybridized with African strains that went into this very aggressive stinging behavior where you could die from being stung so many times, which was not the ancestral state for our New World version of these bees.
So just notable there is that the difference between Africanized honeybees and non-Africanized honeybees is entirely one of behavior and a difference in group behavior by the bees.
Right. Genetically transmitted.
But many people don't understand. They may think that it's a different venom. It's actually when stung by one of our non-Africanized honeybees. I think it's just Apis mellifera.
Yep.
Typically, you'll get one sting and, maybe a couple and you can get away, but Africanized honeybees chase you down.
They do. And, this is a response to different hazards to the hive.
Sure.
So that, it's not like the Africanized or the African bees are being wasteful. They just have hazards that require a lot more stings to dissuade them.
Right.
But the thing I wanted to point to is that one of the things that we have learned in the study of these animals is that they mark the animal that they perceive to have been a threat to the hive, whether it was or not. So if you walk too close to a hive and you get a sting, you are now carrying a chemical signature. And so the fact that you back away from the hive is now not good enough because you have been marked as hazard to hive, and therefore you run.
Yes.
You run, and you hope very much that you don't run into a thicket you can't get through, or trip, or, and there's a famous story in research circles, it would now be 20 years ago at least, of a student who disturbed a hive in a cave and tripped and died, was stung to death. But in any case,
Wait, there was a hive in a cave?
Somehow.
Okay.
Yeah.
That seems strange, but
I don't remember the exact story. It was a OTS student, I believe. But in any case, the fact of we're going to set a bar, and if you tread across it, we're going to label you with some phobia or something like that, which makes you devil, and then no holds barred from that moment on. That is very much how this seems to work. Now, the other thing that this makes me think, though, is I must say I do not resonate with the idea of hating people very frequently. It's a very rare individual that I find deserving of hate. I can be very angry. I'm very angry at the behavior, for example, of these platforms and the way that they are attempting to control the way we think. But as for actually hating people, I reserve that for ultra special occasions.
Yes. Well, and I think we're going to get to, he starts, the little excerpt that I read in the very beginning suggests that it's a particular kind of person. And what I'd like to do is talk about, even if you do enjoy succumbing to rage, even if you do find yourself as someone who has done this and may be, flippable to a different ideology that appears to be exactly the opposite, but that it's actually the same kind of personality defect, really, that you are revealing. How is it that you could instead become someone who is not as susceptible to rage, who does not find it so enjoyable?
Yes, and in some sense, I wonder, I think this is one characteristic. The propensity to hate means that you are vulnerable to becoming a pawn of one of these movements. And these movements are very often driven by people who have an agenda that isn't about you, it's about them.
Right.
And so not being susceptible to hate may even be like an immune response to prevent yourself from being capturable.
Yes, so that's excellent. Not being susceptible to hate may provide a kind of immune response. Here we have his list, which is just interesting, of the disaffected who are most likely to be grabbable. So apart from the discussion of can you find yourself immune to, apart from what you can 100% change about your own life, these are things, some of which be very hard to escape from, and so you might have to work harder to not succumb to a mass movement. Though the disaffected are found in all walks of life, they are most frequent in the following categories: the poor, misfits, outcasts, minorities, adolescent youth, the ambitious, whether facing insurmountable obstacles or unlimited opportunities, those in the grip of some vice or obsession, the impotent in body or mind, the inordinately selfish, the bored, the sinners. So he then proceeds to spend many, many pages on a description of many of these, which we don't have time to do for the most part here. But I want to share a little bit specifically about boredom. I'm not sure that's what's next, though. From that list, though, the poor, misfits, minorities, etc., what we see here, if we can read, and again, I don't think that the Trump phenomenon really is a mass movement the way the left makes it out to be, although it does have some elements of it. But if we for the moment read these as two competing mass movements, it is in effect pitting members of each of some of those groups against one another. right? It's sort of, it is, the left seems to have completely forgotten about class, right? Which, when we were growing up, this was the concern that we understood to be the thing that really continues to keep people down. And Trump does speak to that, whereas people on the left, the most vocal leaders on the left, come from quite a lot of money privilege, which is the kind of privilege that speaks loudest. So let's see. When people, Hoffer writes, are ripe for a mass movement, they are usually ripe for any effective movement, and not solely for one with a particular doctrine or program. And furthermore, since all mass movements draw their adherents from the same types of humanity and appeal to the same types of mind, it follows that all mass movements are competitive, and the gain of one adherence is the loss of all the others. All mass movements are interchangeable. One mass movement really transforms itself into another. A religious movement may develop into a social revolution or a nationalist movement, a social revolution into militant nationalism or a religious movement, a nationalist movement into a social revolution or a religious movement. And I would say that we saw this even, I didn't pull up any clips, but in the early days of the post-George Floyd death protests that quickly became riots as well, we saw some, clearly like good faith Black Lives Matter people, and I don't know if they identify as leaders or not. I don't know what kind of a hierarchical or not hierarchical system they have in place, but we saw people really appealing to rioters, saying, you are doing damage to what we are trying to accomplish here. But what you saw were, a lot of people who were disaffected, who were frustrated, seeing this outpouring of energy and rage on the streets, who were coming in, who, even if we allow that the germ of the Black Lives Matter movement had good people in it, which certainly it had good people in it, whether or not the original founders of it were honest brokers. It quickly became corrupted by all of these other people who were just looking for a mass movement. And the argument here would be they could have just as easily, they want to call themselves communists. They could have just easily become fascists. In any of these other ideologies. That the ideology isn't the driving force. It's the belonging. It's the sense of frustration. Frankly, it's the abolition of the past, which is another thing that he talks about here. And in order to really dissuade one from thinking about the past, one also has to make the idea of the present into a living hell. And so you cannot imagine that today is okay or that tomorrow was okay. You're only looking forward into basically a utopian future.